All right. Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to finish the Swiss Family Robinson. There's only a few chapters left. So today's reading is going to be shorter than usual. But just to remind everyone of what happened from the beginning of the book. So the Swiss Family Robinson was on a ship, and there was a huge storm that came while they were out in the ocean, and it destroyed their ship. So they had to settle in on an island, and so far they've built a house in the trees. They've planted many fruits and vegetables for them to eat. They made a cave for them to sleep in. They came across bears and snakes, and they also made a fort just in case somebody comes and if there's any animals or any danger. And we left off on a really interesting place where they found a note on a bird from another sailor that crashed. They originally thought that they were the only family that survived the shipwreck, but apparently there was another person, and he wrote on a note that said, "Save the poor shipwrecked sailor on the rock." So we'll see what happens with them. And tomorrow there's going to be another story and a different one. So tune back in tomorrow to find out what I'm going to read. Chapter 13. A Rescue. My 3 older boys and I prepared for a voyage. Jack and Ernest suspecting only that we were going to harvest more of the pearls. We loaded the canoe and pinnace with hams, cassava cakes, barley bread, rice, nuts, almonds, dried fruits, and barrels of water, plus many other tools. Our dogs, the children of our original companions, Turk and Flora, came with us. There was a fresh and favorable breeze. We embarked immediately. We steered our way through the rocks with great difficulty. The rocks were covered with the whitened bones of walruses. Ernest made us stop several times so he could collect some of the remains for our Museum of Natural History. At last, we arrived at the Bay of Pearls. We used rakes, hooks, nets, and poles to gather a large quantity of the precious oysters. We made ready to go back to Felsenheim. But as we were turning toward home, Fritz paddled up to me in his canoe, handed me a paper, and shot off like an arrow. I opened the paper. It said that he was going in search of the shipwrecked sailor. It was unsafe to go alone, but Fritz rode so fast that he was soon out of sight. 5 days passed, and still Fritz had not returned. His mother was so worried that we all went in search for him. We had not gone far when Ernest uttered a loud scream. "Fritz!" he cried, and pointed to a vessel in the distance dancing over the waves. Nearer and nearer he came. At last we were together. When we had freed Fritz from our many embraces, we asked him all sorts of questions, speaking all together. I drew him aside and demanded to know if he had been successful concerning the sailor. He said eagerly and joyously, "I was, Papa. I found the poor shipwrecked girl, for it was a woman who had written those lines. For 3 years, she lived on a little island all alone, without anything. Oh, but don't say anything to the others. I want to enjoy their surprise. I told my family to hoist the sails, weight anchor, and make ready to leave. It took us an hour to sail to the island. The young woman was waiting for us there. She was dressed as a handsome young sailor, and she had timid eyes. It had been such a long time ago since we had seen another human being, 10 years, that we were speechless. The silence was broken by Fritz, who, taking the young sailor by the hand, said, May I introduce you to Emily Montrose? She, like ourselves, has been shipwrecked on this coast. His voice broke with emotion. She is welcome among us, said Elizabeth joyfully. I assured Emily she would always find food and warmth with us. My wife and I would be her parents, and my sons her brothers. Elizabeth opened her arms, and Emily rushed into them, bursting into a flood of tears and thanking us for our kindness. Joy now reigned among us. Supper was served. It was a great treat to Emily. My sons asked the shy newcomer so many questions she didn't know who to answer first. But they were also embarrassed and awkward. My poor boys didn't know how to act with a young lady. They had never met one before. We loaded up the things Emily had saved from her shipwreck, and those she had herself, clothes, ornaments, utensils, and tools. Emily now said goodbye to the island that had been her home for 3 years. We turned toward Felsenheim. We were curious about Emily's story. She was English, but raised in India. Her mother had died when she was young. Her father had taught her how to shoot and ride, as well as how to sew. She was a colonel in the Navy, and when they wanted to return home to England, she was not allowed to sail on his Navy ship, for such were the rules. She did, however, sail on the same day as he did, but in another ship. A terrible storm arose. The ship was thrown off course, and a rough wave drove it onto our rocky coast. The poor girl alone escaped the waves, which carried her to land. The first few days she felt nothing but despair. She had no food except some birds' eggs, which she found in the rocks. But over time, she built a hut, fished, hunted, and tamed birds. But she was alone for 3 long, dreary years. As we neared home, the boys took one boat and sailed on ahead so they could have everything prepared for Emily when we returned. They greeted us with a 10-gun salute. The moment Emily's foot touched the sand, a hurrah echoed through the air. In the grotto, a table was spread with bananas, figs, guavas, oranges, fried fish, and a huge turkey. A wreath of flowers spelled out, "Welcome, fair Emily." Emily, for her part, was astonished that a single family could have accomplished so much. Then she sat down happily at the table. In the days and weeks that followed, Emily proved her worth. She worked as hard as any of us, and always with zeal and industry. She inspired everybody. Emily became, to Elizabeth and myself, a 5th child, and a beloved sister for my sons. Chapter 14, the last chapter. Conclusion. I have 1,000 different feelings as I write the word conclusion. It was toward the end of the rainy season, and a patch of blue sky could now and then be seen. We opened the door of our home and breathed fresh air. Our first care was for our gardens, which had been damaged during the winter. Then Jack and Fritz set out for Shark Island to check on our fort. Nothing important had been destroyed there. To make sure the cannons were in good order, they began firing. They were astonished when, a moment later, they heard 3 shots of a cannon in the distance. But they didn't know who had fired, so they hurried home to tell the rest of us. If there is really a ship on our coasts, I said, who knows whether it's manned by honest sailors or pirates? Should we rejoice or be sorry? Should we prepare to be saved or attacked? To be safe, I quickly created a defense. Fritz and Jack were impatient and decided to return to Shark Island to try a new signal. I went with them. On arriving at the fort, we hoisted our flag and Jack loaded a cannon and fired it. Then we heard a louder answering shot in the direction of Cape Disappointment. Jack couldn't contain his joy. People! It's people! He cried, dancing around us. Overpowered with emotion, we hurried to our boat to explore the mysterious shot. We coasted along without seeing anything, and almost began to think we'd imagined it all. Then we rounded a spit of land, and suddenly we beheld a fine ship majestically resting at anchor. An English flag floated at the masthead. I cannot find the words to express the feelings which filled us. Fritz wanted to throw himself into the sea and swim to the ship. I was afraid that, even with the English flag, the ship might be full of pirates who flew the flag in order to deceive others. I cried out through my speaking trumpet these 3 words: Englishmen, good men. But there was no answer. Perhaps they were afraid of us. Our clothes marked us as natives, possibly unfriendly ones. We wished to present ourselves in a better light, so we darted off as fast as our boat could carry us. We spent a whole day preparing for our meeting and loading our craft with gifts. We set off at sunrise. When we could see the ship again, I cried, "Hoist the English flag!" We approached the ship to welcome it to our shores. The captain received us with openness and friendship. I recounted the history of our shipwreck and our stay on the coast. I told him of Emily and asked if he had ever heard of her father. He not only knew him, but assured me that he was alive and well. He told me that his ship, on its way to Sydney, had been blown off course. When we heard your cannon, we wondered who was fortunate enough to be stuck on this coast. Instead, we find an organized colony filled with everything anyone could need. This made us laugh, and we took the captain's hand in friendship. When we prepared to return to shore, the captain asked us to take with us an English family, Mr. Woolston and his wife and 2 daughters, who were not well. My readers can imagine how astonished the Woolston family was upon seeing everything we'd accomplished. The 2 families united over a dinner meal under the gallery of the grotto, and my wife prepared beds for the newcomers inside Felsenheim's rocky vaults. The next morning, Mr. Woolston came to me with tenderly outstretched hands and spoke as follows. "Sir," said he, "we have been admiring the wonders here. You live happily, far from the difficulties of the world. I came from England seeking rest. Where can I find it better than here? I would be the happiest of men if you would allow us to stay." This idea of Mr. Woolston's filled me with joy, and I immediately assured him that we would share half of everything we had with his family. The morning was devoted to the joy and pleasure that this news caused, but sadness also occupied my mind. The ship was the only one we'd seen in 10 years, and probably as long a time would go by before another appeared. Should we let the captain and his ship leave without us? Elizabeth didn't wish to return to Europe. I was myself too attached to my young life to leave it. But our children were young. I didn't want to deprive them of civilization. and Emily, since she had heard her father was in England, wanted badly to return. At last, I called my children together and asked them if they would leave with the captain's ship or be happy to remain the rest of their lives on this coast. Jack and Ernest said they would stay. Ernest needed nothing more than his books and a quiet place to study, which he had here. Jack enjoyed hunting too much to go. Fritz and Francis, however, had a great desire to return to Europe. The Wollstone family, too, was split up. One daughter remained with her parents. These arrangements were very painful. The ship remained 8 days in anchor. We prepared rich cargo for our children to take with them: pearls, ivory, spices, and furs. We also furnished the ship with meat and fruits. On the eve of their departure, I had one last conversation with my children. I gave Fritz the diary I had written of our shipwreck and life on the coast, which you read now. None of us slept much during the last night. At dawn, the cannon of the ship announced that all who were leaving must be board. We brought our children to the shore. There, we embraced them one last time. The anchor had been weighed, the sails unfurled, the flag run up the masthead, and a rapid wind promised to separate us from our loved ones quickly. I will not try to describe the grief of my dear Elizabeth. Jack and Ernest were weeping bitterly, and I, too, can but badly conceal my sorrow. I finish these lines while the ship's boat is waiting. My sons receive my last blessing. Goodbye, dear children. Goodbye, Europe. Goodbye, Switzerland. Never shall I see you again. May you always be happy, good-hearted, and free. The end. So that concludes my reading of the Swiss Family Robinson. Today is going to be a little bit of a shorter episode than usual, but tomorrow is going to be a great story as well. I can't wait to start reading it tomorrow. And don't forget, I'm also soon going to start reading about the boy who saw a little flying man on top of his roof and how they became best friends. And I'm going to read that soon, not tomorrow, but I will start soon. So thanks a lot for sticking with me through Swiss Family Robinson. And tomorrow at 4, there's going to be a new story. So have a beautiful, wonderful day, and I'll see you tomorrow.